Hello, everyone. I'm Anabel Quan-Haase. I'm the co-lead on the project, and we're super excited to welcome you all. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are located. So the title of today's panel discussion is Why Critical AI Literacy Matters, Implications for Policy and Practice in UK and Canada. So I would like to start by just acknowledging where I am located today, where Western and the Faculty of Information and Media Studies are located. And I ask you all to kind of think about and acknowledge your own location. So we acknowledge that Western University is located on the traditional lands of the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, Lunapawak, and Shantung nations, on lands connected with the London Township and Sumra Treaties of 1796 and the Dish with One Spoon Covenant Wampum. With this, we respect the long-standing relationships that Indigenous nations have to this land as they are the original caretakers. We acknowledge historical and ongoing injustices that Indigenous peoples endure in Canada, and we accept responsibility as a public institution to contribute toward revealing and correcting miseducation, as well as renewing respectful relationships with Indigenous communities through our teaching, research, and community service. So again, if you want to share where you're located today on the chat, and just kind of reflect and acknowledge the meaning of land and the contributions we can make to continuing, ongoing positive relationships with the communities around us. So I would like to next continue just by kind of introducing everybody here on the panel today. So Katharine Willis is co-chair with myself, and we're super excited to have had the opportunity to put this panel together that we think, addresses a lot of the important things at all levels, from how our education system is changing to how we navigate cities. But also, I think things that really relate to what we do at FIMS and at Western, which is the training of both librarians and educators. And I want to really welcome and thank our panelists today. So Tim Davies from Connected by Data in the UK, Tanya Duarte from WEandAI, also in the UK, Cara Brisson-Boivin from MediaSmarts here in Canada, and Shawn Mitchell from Toronto Public Library. We really selected our panelists very carefully, as they're all deeply involved in issues related to AI, whether it's with practice, with educators, with librarians, library policy, policy at the national level, international levels, and citizenship and advocacy. So welcome to the panelists, and also welcome to all of you, our attendees here today. We're really excited to have you, and we really look forward to an engaging discussion. I just want to start by giving you an overview of what the panel will look like. So we'll start with brief opening remarks. We'll have the panel reflections, the Q&A session, the audience Q&A session, and then some closing remarks. So we're really hoping that this discussion will lead to some deeper engagement as to where this area is moving and what are some of our next important steps from different locations, from marginalized communities, citizen advocacy, institutions, individuals. So we really want to look at it from a multi-layered perspective. Very briefly, this is part of a larger research grant. We were super excited to see a call that brings together Canadian and UK researchers to kind of address, not only in an interdisciplinary, but in an intercontinental way, some of the big questions that confront us. So what we're aiming through this grant is to do a knowledge synthesis. So a knowledge synthesis is an overview of the literature to date on a topic. So the topic we've chosen is critical AI literacy. So we're looking at all the publications out there from all fields that address questions around what is AI literacy, how has it been studied, what are potentially determinants of AI literacy, and what are some of the outcomes So people that have higher AI literacy, what benefits do they obtain, or even detriment? So those are some of the larger questions we're asking, and we're hoping that through this knowledge mobilization piece today, we can actually look at this question from multiple angles. So we're very excited, and with this, we're moving to the next stage, which is the Q&A part.
Thanks, Anabel. So yes, just to highlight, we'd really appreciate everybody to put some questions in the chat. We're going to shortly hand over to the panelists to give their first thoughts, and then we'll have a chaired discussion. But following that, we've got 15 minutes for Q&A, and we'd really appreciate people to engage in that. But in terms of the format, that is going to be text-based, but we will curate your questions and bring them to the panel. So yes, please do put those in while you're listening to the panelists. And before we go any further, I just really want to introduce our amazing panelists and give them opportunity to sort of set the scene and provide a little bit of background to their own work in this topic. So I think I'm going to hand over to Tim, first of all, Tim Davies from Connected by Data, who's going to first start with his brief reflections on the topic of the panel.
Thank you so much, and thanks, Anabel and Katharine, and everyone who's been convening this kind of conversation, connecting our experiences from different contexts. So my name's Tim Davies. I'm the Director of Research and Practice at Connected by Data, and we're a campaign for communities to have a powerful voice in governing data and AI. And obviously a critical literacy in AI is foundational to that. And I think it's there at a number of levels. One, it's there at the level of individual and community agency. We have technologies that have come into our lives quite rapidly in the generative AI boom, but also that have been growing into our lives over many decades, but that we've not created space for people to stop, understand, interrogate, and feel confident in interrogating. And for us, deliberative practices are really important, but those need literacies, those need good quality information, those need balanced expert inputs to get there. And I think just one other theme to bring in is we're doing this in a particular space where the narratives around AI are controlled by a very small number or dominated by a very small number of organizations and viewpoints, and where the literacy building that's happening is being funded by a very narrow group of interests in many cases. So my own engagement with this space came from seeing announcements in the UK around skill building and literacy framed purely in economic terms, purely in terms of skills for the marketplace, rather than skills for living and capacities and literacies for everyday life. And then seeing that it was the industry voices that were dominating that, and therefore saying we need to be collectively calling for much more independent critical AI literacy building in what happens. It's great to see people amongst the other panelists and on the call who are at the forefront of making that happen. So I'm here to engage in that conversation and learn as well.
Thanks, Tim. And I think we'll pass over to Cara next.
Thanks so much. Yeah, thank you, Katharine and Anabel, for organizing this and for including myself and MediaSmarts in this discussion. My name is Brisson-Boivin. I'm the Director of Research at MediaSmarts. MediaSmarts is Canada's nonprofit centre for digital media literacy. We are celebrating our 30th anniversary in 2026, so quickly approaching 30 years of doing and advocating for digital media literacy work across the country. Our primary office is located on unceded Algonquin Anishinaabe territory in what is known as Ottawa, Canada. But as I said, we serve sort of all parts and regions of the country. And our vision is that everyone is empowered to engage with all forms of media confidently and critically. And as Tim has already mentioned, in the UK context, critical AI literacy has become a core component of digital literacy. To achieve the work that we do in those goals, we conduct and disseminate original research that then informs all of the educational work and the development of our resources, as well as public policy on issues related to digital media. We develop internationally recognized educational resources that are distributed across K-12 schools in Canada, but also general public educational tools and resources, as digital literacy, and again, AI being part of that, has become a critical life skill for people of all ages across the life course. So I think, just as a way of sort of framing briefly an opening comment, I would say, as technology evolves and new technologies like AI are emerging, digital media literacy, or the ability to critically and confidently access, use, understand, engage, and create with technology of all forms, and meaningfully do so, has again really become a critical life skill for people of all ages. So we need to invest, especially in Canada, in critical digital skill development and building in order for people to be able to benefit from technology, and engage in civic processes to bolster our economy and access essential services. I think one of the things that I'll be happy to sort of discuss within this critical conversation today is the importance of Canada investing at a structural level in Canadians' digital media literacy and their AI literacy in particular. So thank you.
Thank you. And I'd like to introduce Tanya next.
Hi, yeah, delighted to be here. Thanks everyone for convening this. So I run WEandAI, which is a volunteer nonprofit organisation. We centre AI literacy within our theory of change. We set up at the beginning of 2020, and our aim still is to enable a greater diversity of people to have the knowledge and confidence to be involved in making decisions about AI. So whether that's through democratic processes, activism, consumer choices, or employee actions and advocacy. But over time, we've had to include the term critical before AI literacy, as we've seen AI literacy become captured by techno-determinist agendas, put it politely, to become an education which is about onboarding consumers to AI or developing AI industry skills. And this approach works against the critical thinking skills, which are increasingly needed in an age of cognitive offloading, increasing power asymmetries, increasing misinformation, an environment, ironically, which is caused by the way that AI has been designed and adopted. So we've moved beyond a focus on awareness or explainers to include more on competencies relating to recognising and decoding prevalent narrative traps or manipulations, and identifying different stakeholders and agendas in relation to power and accountability. And this requires enabling an understanding of the human and the material supply chain and the full life cycle of AI, as well as the very basic technical fundamentals of data algorithms, machine learning, generative AI. So we think only with all of these elements combined is it possible to form and act on opinions about AI that are truly in line with values and interests, as opposed to based on incomplete or missing perceptions. In practice, we co-design and deliver critical literacy syllabuses and interventions. We advise on content, frameworks, methodology, and terminology related to curricular courses, workshops, public engagements, deliberations, participatory research. Examples of projects we've worked on are the only UK free online public course on AI and society, Living with AI, which is a 5-week online course delivered by the Scottish AI Alliance. We co-designed peer-delivered workshops on deepfake, synthetic media, chatbot relationships for 14 to 19-year-olds. But we've also done library workshops with older people with King's College London, uncovering socio-technical perspectives of AI. We've done sensory workshops, engaging people in material, economic and human elements of AI. And last year, we did a 3-session interactive course for participants in an Ada Lovelace Institute deliberation on AI and public good. In terms of our advisory, I mentioned we do that as well. We work with universities on scoping how to engage publics with societal implications of particular projects. And we also recently advised a Royal Society commissioned review of AI literacy frameworks as part of policy guidance on AI literacy in the UK. We're best known, though, perhaps for our project Better Images of AI, which provides free images and guidelines for communicating about AI in a more transparent, realistic, and inclusive way, while simultaneously exploring AI concept through visual narratives. A few pieces of work that haven't come out yet, which is really frustrating for this conversation. I was the definitions lead on the IEEE standard on data and AI literacy skills and readiness, which is going going through polling right now. With Katie Conrad, I've written the first chapter in the forthcoming Springer Nature Handbook on AI and Ethics, which is 10,000 words on the emergence of critical AI literacy. One thing that is out, I've recently written a section for a chapter on AI literacy for the 2025 Montreal AI Ethics Institute's State of AI Ethics. I probably can link that. But yeah, the rest are waiting to come out. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tanya, and I'll pass over to Shawn now.
Great, thank you, and thank you, Katharine and Anabel, for inviting me to participate in this panel today. So my name is Shawn Mitchell, my pronouns are he, him, and I am the Director for Policy Planning and Performance Management here at Toronto Public Library. And Toronto Public Library is North America's largest and busiest public library. We have 100 branches across our city here in Toronto. And for our folks across the pond who may not know, but Toronto is the largest city in Canada. So my role at Toronto Public Library, what I'll speak a bit about today is the policy hat that I wear, and particularly around the creation of Toronto Public Library's AI policy and implementation. So we're currently in the throes of implementing the policy at the moment. And it's great to hear some of the comments from the other panelists here, as these are questions that we've also been grappling with as we created our policy, but also moving forward with implementation. So I'll be bringing a bit of more of a practitioner-based lens and on-the-ground lens for how do we make this a reality at public libraries and how it's going in trying to move forward with this policy while also meeting the demands of public and meeting the demands of our staff as well. So I'm happy to speak to those components when we get to that today.
Thank you, everybody. We have an amazing panel. I'm really excited to have you here with your expertise and with all the work that you're doing in your various spheres which you work. So now we're going to move to a sort of curated panel session where I'm going to raise some questions and perhaps pose them to the panel. Just for the members of people who've joined us, please do also post your QA in the chat. We'll bring those together, and after this curated session we'll move to an open session, so please do continue to post questions as we go so that we have a chance to pull those together and prepare them for when we move to that stage. We've now got about 20 minutes where we're going to just bring up some of the sort of topics that we wanted to address in this panel, and I think the first one is what you've all spoken about is the sort of critical nature of AI and how we think about AI literacy not just as a competency that's going to be delivered. I think Tim spoke about that, that those literacy narratives are controlled by private companies. It's very much the idea of obtaining some sort of literacy rather than challenging. So one of the first questions, which I'm going to start with Cara first of all, because it's interesting because you've worked with digital literacy in this sphere for quite a long time, so you've seen quite a background to it, but how can we extend beyond sort of measuring knowledge and competencies to include that critical engagement and informed decision making, and particularly thinking about who's AI literacy, who's being involved in that AI literacy program or process in which we sort of see ourselves in society at the moment. So, Cara, I'll just put that question to you first of all, if that's okay, and then we'll move to some of the other panelists as well.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. And I think, MediaSmarts had the great pleasure and responsibility of being the sort of home of Canada's longest study on digital literacy, especially for youth. So we've seen this historical kind of or we have a historical understanding of how that shift, as you describe it, is sort of happening. I will say one thing that is really important that is still missing, while we have a general sort of picture of how people's digital media literacy skills have sort of shifted over time from, that includes the shifts in technology. What's missing is a baseline understanding in Canada of what's happening in classrooms. And in part, that's because digital media literacy in the Canadian context is offered in a sort of patchwork, very haphazard way by typically educators who are champions of digital media literacy. There isn't a core curriculum across consistently across the 13 provinces and territories in our country that would mandate a kind of curriculum that would allow us to sort of look at a benchmark level and knowledge and gain that kind of understanding at a holistic kind of. And so that's one of the things that MediaSmarts is to embark on the fifth phase of our Young Canadian study, where we are trying to get a sense of what is happening at the classroom level, for whom, who's teaching it, in what ways, how, again, because we know that typically when, things like AI literacy in particular are being taught in the classroom, they're being taught by educators who already have a certain level of confidence to be able to do this. This is not something that every teacher is going to even want to touch for fear of not fully understanding it. And so I would just briefly also say, I echo, Tim's comments that currently one of the risks is that the agenda is being set by those who have not just the sort of power insofar as the sort of corporate power to set the agenda, but also by those who have the knowledge, confidence, and skills to feel they can enter this conversation. And I think it's so important that we address that gap, both in the classroom and outside, because I think for so many folks who want to feel they can critically and confidently engage with the tool, there is this sort of fear about not understanding what it is and how it's working. And so this can sort of result in a kind of reticence to enter the conversation. And then finally, I would just say, and part of the challenge is that we end up then with this kind of pendulum when it comes especially to AI, a very sort of early adopters, dove headfirst, very eager, and then those who have sort of buried their heads in the sand. And it's like, ne'er the two shall meet. And so part of our role is actually bringing people into this middle ground where we can ensure people can use confidently the tool, but are also thinking critically about implications for things like privacy, ethics, and so on. And so right now we have this, as I say, sort of pendulum, and I think we really need to bridge that for folks.
Thank you, Cara. That's really interesting. And I suppose just leading on to Tanya now, because I think you've talked about with WEandAI some of those programs that you've developed around how engage different groups with AI literacy, and also the work you've done with the Royal Society about identifying that. I'm just wondering, in terms of the programs you talked about, the peer workshops and the free course, how do you feel those worked in terms of addressing some of those more critical AI literacy skill sets that are missing, or not missing, but might be something we want to support in a different way?
I mean, I guess there's two sides to it. Firstly is, so the reason we do research and pilots, so none of, with the exception of the Scottish course, most of our work is, in small, we've tried very hard to get funding for national programs and rollouts, and it's not really stuck. But it's been quite small. But the importance of that is therefore really understanding where people are. And the key thing there is, one size doesn't fit all. And that is the problem with large scale programs, is that individual groups are also so different in terms of their attitudes, their existing knowledge, what's important to them. So I think tailored is one thing that I'd say is always tailoring to the group. But then underneath that, there's fundamental principles that everyone needs to know. And I think they are quite easy. And one of the reasons why people don't go to, marginalized communities, or, we've done workshops with people with learning, for learning disabled people, is because there's this idea that it's really hard. But fundamental principles are to do, with simple things like AI is maths, and it doesn't have agency, and they're actually quite easy things for almost anyone to understand, and they're more important for people, at that kind of entry level to thinking, than knowing any technical nuances. And they're definitely more important than learning how to prompt most effectively or anything like that. So yeah, I'm not sure that kind of answered. I think it's really thinking about the audience and researching with them. I'd say that what we spend most of the time on though is actually less how do we tell people things and more how do we get them to decode and ask questions about who's teaching them, who's telling them, why do they information that the way that they are. And that we've put quite a lot of research into, which, yeah, I mean, I can talk a bit, but I can talk about that separately.
Thank you, Tanya. I know, of course, the Better MediaSmarts project is a really amazing example of something that's been really widely used and enables that sort of transfer of knowledge from a space where you've got more agency in how we think about AI. I'm just going to hand over to Tim now, because I know you mentioned about the open letter that you did to UK government around to sort of challenge around the AI literacy framework that's being proposed. And I just wondered how you saw that work. And I know you've done some convening around the Data and AI Civil Society Network, as well as the Public Voices in AI project, but how those projects have been working, particularly in the UK context, to enable that more critical thinking around AI.
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. I just want to first recognize, as Tanya was saying, the kind of unlearning to be done. So often we think literacy is learning. I'm just back from Mozilla Festival, which was framed around unlearning and changing our imagination of things. And I think there's a difference in the literacy building here that is about countering a dominant narrative that is destabilizing our ability for agency and literacy and doing that. And so I think that then leads into those other bits of work we've been doing in the UK. One is saying we need, as advocates of literacy that builds people's agency and autonomy and freedom, to be knocking on the doors and coordinating and pushing that messaging in face of corporate lobbying to a different effect. And so what we've been trying to do in the UK with the Data and AI Civil Society Network and with open letters is to recognise there are a wealth of academics, community projects, others who want a better vision of what AI is, but we're often under-resourced, struggling for resourcing, financing, chances to connect, and we really need to think about how do we coordinate and bring the weight of evidence we have from the work that the literature reviews recently done. There is a weight of evidence in favour of that this is long term in the better interest of our economies, as well as economies, as societies, to have populations who can take agency alongside AI rather than have their agency removed by it. And I think the other part that we've done a lot on of public voice work is around the importance of communities learning together. So again, at MozFest yesterday, I was hearing some of the polling work that's looked at the different clusters across populations, where you have maybe 15 or 20% of people who are very, very optimistic about what AI will do, another 20 or 30% very, very fearful about what AI might mean for their future. And deliberative practice is about bringing some of those people together in conversation with each other, finding the common ground and understanding, recognizing we're each picking up some part of an understanding of what AI is, but also that literacy is not, for these technologies, something held as an individual or isolated. It's something that is held in your community. Do you have the access to understanding in your community? Have you developed norms and practices to look out for each other's epistemic freedom, or like, are we able to work together to build knowledge through these technologies? And I think there's something really important there about those conversations. The last thing to mention from some of that public engagement work is it's really helped highlight some of the places publics want to engage with literacy building. So I see Margaret Colling on the call, who was involved in our People's Panel on AI and's gone on to really challenge us to say, how are we taking AI literacy out into neighbourhoods, onto bus stop messages, rather than like conversations and courses you have to go to? I think this is where libraries, again, maybe if I end there, are so important and powerful, is how are we taking AI literacy opportunities to communities where people are, rather than expecting them to come into new spaces to learn to live alongside the technology they maybe didn't choose to have dropped into their lives.
Fascinating. Thank you, Tim. I think that's gives a really good perspective, and again, that sort of counter narrative around how I might think about AI within a much more shared community-based learning approach. So I think that does lead really nicely into Shawn's role in Toronto Public Library. So I know typically sort of digital inclusion work has always sort of, libraries have been a home, and they're the place where we gain the sort of skills that we need to participate in society, particularly for the most excluded. So passing on to Shawn, I'm just wondering, thinking about what role for public libraries in the way we might think about critical literacy, and the way we might involve groups who maybe typically would not be involved in this process. You know, as Tim mentioned, those who maybe aren't in the sorts of places or involved in the sort of levels that we see where some of these competencies are typically being talked about. So Shawn, I wanted just to speak a little bit about how you see the role for libraries, and particularly in the Canadian context.
Sure. Yeah, I think that's a great question. And as you say, digital literacy has definitely been a strong focus for public libraries, specifically here in Canada, and for us at Toronto Public Library. And we've done a number of studies, again, practitioner-based studies with surveys that assess the usage and demographics of our technology services related to digital literacy and digital access. And what we found with that is that there's a disproportionate amount of disadvantaged communities that do rely and access our services. So we are definitely one of those touch points for those folks who I think that we're talking a bit about here today that we can reach. So from a community perspective, I think we are definitely that conduit that will be able to help educate and share some of this critical AI digital literacy skills. And some ways that we are looking at that. So we feel as well from a policy lens, and that's why we created the AI policy, is looking at and setting a framework for, this is from a staff perspective, but we do have staff who run the training related to AI literacy and AI programming and collections. So it really is for us that starting point. And we wanted to lay the groundwork that really sets out the safe and effective and ethical and responsible use of AI. And it is much more, I'd say, principle-based at this point. And we've been looking at the process of implementing and moving through that, specifically in relation to programming. So we have a number of programs that are underway at the moment that look at one of which is called AI upskilling. And I hear everyone on this panel, yes, I would agree that narrative is pushed through the who has power in those conversations. But we are working within that context because our principle is access. And I feel if people do not have access, we can't even have a conversation. So, ensuring that folks have access to AI tools, AI education is the starting point. And I think through that is where we do engage, and we're building up our programs that discuss some of these skill sets and working with community partners for AI critical lenses when we use the tools, when we engage with the tools, that they're asking this from a privacy lens, from an ethics lens, a security lens. Where is the information saved? Who is storing it? So it's part of our programming, and it's something that we're integrating and moving forward. That said, I always use the analogy, we're flying the plane as we build it. It's such an evolving space. We want to make sure we're providing access to the community. But as you all say here, it's changing and evolving. So we're trying to bring in community experts and help us build these trainings as we start to roll it out. So just to summarize, I do see us as a central player here, and it's exciting to be part of that, but we want to make sure that we're, again, doing it in ways that's all along the lines of what folks have spoke about here, that they have critical analysis as they're using the tools.
Thank you, Shawn. I think now we can sort of just have a brief sort of summing up, or I'm just going to prompt one more question from the panel, and then we can move to questions from the audience or from the people who joined us today. So please, if you do still have questions, do put them in the chat, and ideally, if you've got a particular panelist that you'd like us to address it to, do let us know. But I'm just going to ask each of the panelists now just to sort of respond to a final sort of short question. One of the things we're looking at in this place, and in many ways you're all working in the policy space or the practice space, but if there was one thing that you would say needs to happen that isn't happening in terms of how we're informing sort of approaches to critical AI literacy within the policy or possibly the practice space in UK and Canada. What might that be? What would be your wish if you had the wand? And I mean, I think one of the things I can definitely see from the conversation we've had today is like the amazing value that your organisations and the work that you're doing is playing, and perhaps isn't valued enough. So I'm going to say we need people like Connected by Data, WEandAI, and MediaSmarts to have a bigger role at the table and to be really leading this conversation. So that would be my wish list because I see the value, and obviously the role of libraries we've seen with Toronto and Shawn. But I'm just going to start. We'll start with Tim. One quick thought or a short thought around what's the key sort of policy wish or hope that you'd have in this space, and maybe the next year that if we had the magic wand we could achieve.
Yeah, I think one of the big things we need is independence of AI literacy programs, which might be about state funding of those, but it also, with the private funding that is around, making sure there is independent governance of the quality and content of kind of programs to make sure, as I think Tanya said earlier, we're not just building new consumers, but we're building critical citizens through these investments. And there should be ways in which governments can act to regulate that to make sure we have a win-win rather than a kind of the situation we have now.
Thank you, Tim. And to Cara, the same question, perhaps from the Canadian context, if that's more familiar.
Yeah, thank you. I would say, and we've been advocating for this at MediaSmarts for almost 20 years now, but the wish remains unfulfilled, and it's that we need a strategy, a federal national level strategy for digital media literacy here in Canada. Other countries and other global contexts, including the UK, do have actually a structured investment in literacy in ways that Canada does not. Other parts of the world like Australia, Jordan, Brazil. And one of the things I just want to tease out and identify is that Canada has a long sort of history of digital policy making where the focus and investment is on infrastructure. And that is important. And I don't want to, suggest that we don't need that. But, recent, investments in Canada, as recent as last week, in the billions of dollars in investing in AI infrastructure and further, AI technological development. While those are important, we need to equally be prioritizing investment in everyday people's capacity and ability to be able to engage with this technology for all of the reasons that have already been mentioned in the panel so far, but also because I do want to highlight that we know that these technologies are being developed in ways that are not inclusive. They are not diverse. They are not engaging with, diverse communities, including, racialized communities, Indigenous communities where investing and embracing different forms of knowledge requires such a more thorough, level of investment, both financially, but also in terms of the way we are going to engage in these communities who have every reason to be concerned or not want to have, for example, their data, involved in training AI tools. But then we end up with this challenge of the AI tools themselves being sort of tools of colonial power and other sort of epistemological regimes that are very white Eurocentric. And so we have big questions, I think, to grapple with in terms of how we're going to continue to design technology that is more equitable. And that requires a level of investment that we just haven't seen here in Canada in, again, building people's literacies in a way that is going to diversify, frankly, the pool of people we can bring to the table. And so I would just say the wish for us remains that we have a critical investment that is at the same level of the kinds of investment we're seeing for the tools, themselves or industry.
Thank you, Carrie. I'm sure that's a brilliant summary of some of the things that we'd hope for. Tanya, I'm going to pass to you next for your one short summary of key policy or sort of implementation next stage.
Sure. So I'll try and make it short, and I agree with everything that's been said. But I think we're starting from the premise that there is, kind of an appetite for critical thinking about AI within policymakers right now. And I think the biggest problem in the UK is that there is a fundamental disconnect between the UK government's approach to turbocharging AI, injecting it into everyone's veins. That their quotes, I didn't paraphrase their actual quotes. And I saw someone had a question in the chat earlier about, which was about what do you wish that tech companies would do to make your job easier, in terms of demystifying the tools. And I think in the UK we have the problem that the actual narrative of the government is very much defying the tools. At the same time, you've got universities embedding generative AI into into the way they deliver education, and mandating teachers, educators to do it. How can we even be thinking about critical approaches when we're forcing educators to do something that they think is fundamentally antithetical to education through the use of generative AI? So I think that there's a bigger problem than just coming up. We have given policy advice on frameworks, and so the Council of Europe have got some good ideas on including like this human dimension in addition to the functional and the technological dimensions of education. They've done a Wayne Holmes, Valley Hillman have done a kind of heat map which shows that all the current AI literacy frameworks, pretty much across the world, they put dozens, hundreds in fact, into a review, and the heat map basically shows that the human dimension is missing from almost all of them. As I say, Council of Europe did quite well. So theoretically, you've got some frameworks there, you've got policy advice on what could we do. I echo some of the things about investment, and I can rattle off a couple of other recommendations, but the appetite needs to be there. And when all the money and the focus is going into building more data centers, and you don't actually want people out there saying, oh, hang on a second, do we want more data centers, when policy is saying, yes, we want all Oracle has to offer. Please put it in our back garden now. Do they really want people challenging that? So I think that this is where I, really commend the work of librarians and media literacy people, because rather than kind of fetishizing the AI bit of the AI literacy, which, is a nonsense term to start off with, and the first step of AI literacy is just saying, there's no such thing as, kind of AI literacy. It is to draw on the media literacy and information literacy and civic literacy that has been around for ages, because actually that's what we need. Yes, we need the AI dimension to it in order to say, oh, we're now dealing with mass automation of human decision making. We've never had that before. How do we deal with that? But at the same time, we need to understand how power is operating, and that's at the moment, I'm not seeing the appetite from DCIT, and I would really urge, kind of our Department for Education to, take a much closer look at, much closer look at and be stronger on the education, the pedagogy side, because it's really lacking at the moment. So I'll stop there, but if anyone is interested, I do have a list of, policy recommendations.
Great. Thank you, Tanya. And it'd be great to see that, share those. Maybe we can do that post workshop. And finally, Shawn, I'm just going to pass to you maybe for some brief thoughts, sort of policy, where might you sit within the public library's role within AI literacy?
Sure, and I'm mindful of time, so I'll keep it very, very brief. I would echo Kara's points as well around, and others about, the focus has been really on investment, has been on infrastructure. So I would recommend, again, more a concerted effort from governments around investment that's looking at. I would also argue, and I might go against a bit of what people are saying, but I do hold access is key. And I feel that when we're having the dialogue we're really worried about the digital divide. So it's great to have critical conversations, but if we don't even have access to any of the tools, especially for disadvantaged communities, and we're talking about people who are living on the streets that don't even have smartphones. So it's something that we really don't want to miss in this conversation. And that how do we engage those people with access while at the same time jointly building the conversation around critical engagement and critical skills? Because those folks aren't asking those types of questions. They're asking, where am I sleeping tonight? Where am I getting my next meal? So I think we do need to be a bit more practical sometimes in the approach that we're taking in ensuring that access is really that starting point, and that as they're accessing it, we can then engage in those conversations once some of those primary needs are met of those individuals from disadvantaged communities.
Thank you, Shawn. So now some fascinating. Hopefully, we get our magic wand and we can we can make those changes. It definitely. I mean, I think it's clear from the consensus in the panel that these things are needed and they're urgent. This is not just a wish list. This is important and you know needs to be addressed at both the policy but at the level of working with communities. So now I'm going to draw on some questions from some of our participants. I'm going to start with a question around, you know, what flipping it really. It says AI is such an opaque technology, which makes it more complex to understand than other forms of digital literacy. What's the one thing you wish the creators of AI would not do, that would make your job of promoting AI literacy easier? So I might pass that to Tim first of all. I think we might just have one panelist per question if that's all right, just because of time. But Tim, I'm gonna, because you talked about the role of the private sector sort of driving the AI literacy framework. I'm just wondering,
Yeah.
assuming that we had more of a voice within those, what would that be?
So I guess I'd go slightly different direction with it, which is in our work, we sort of see a lot of AI literacy building that tries to open the black box of what's the clever technology going on inside. And a lot of the time we say that's not what's needed. Actually, as an STS scholar in the past, it's like keeping the black box closed seems an odd thing to do, but actually what goes in, what comes out, you're much more empowered to assess that, understand that without needing to understand what goes on inside the machine. And you can demand that the makers of machines account to you on that basis without blinding you with the science. I don't need to understand how the car engine works to know when it's failing to do what it's meant to do of getting me from A to B. So I think there's something of starting the basics. They're saying if you want to open it and understand the innards, because you want to be a maker, then that's great. But not getting ourselves drawn into the people who say, I'm going to start blinding you with some science that restricts your agency rather than enables it. So I think accountable AI more than explainable AI is where I'd go in terms of important action. I'll pause there because there's many more questions to come.
Thank you, Tim. I think that black boxing is a really important point and really key to demystifying it, because part of the challenge is that at the moment, the way we're talking about AI makes it inaccessible in terms of language we use and the sort of types of ways it's addressed. So another question we had is, with the growing trend of using AI as a cost-effective, stigma-free and accessible tool, what cautionary words would you recommend to implement as education and a critical lens for those seeking online support? So I think that's around, you know, what might we think about the things that we currently have in place and how to critically address those. And I might hand that over to Cara, because of the work you've done particularly with the younger people. I know you've worked a lot with younger people in Canada and you have good understanding. So perhaps with that in mind, addressing younger people and how they might what might be the way to address that with education?
Sure. I think I would just say two things. I mean, first, I would say we don't yet, I think, know enough about people's parasocial relationships with, especially chat style AI and Gen AI. We're starting to understand that. We know that young people are particularly vulnerable for example, developing those kinds of parasocial relationships where they view AI, for example, as sort of a friend or a confidant, and then this becomes particularly concerning when that's the sort of baseline or lens being used to access things like mental health supports. because we also know that, mental health, financial advice, legal advice, health advice, these are the sort of key topics where, our resources offer, words of caution when engaging with AI, that it's always best to seek those kinds of expertise from a known sort of, human expert. However, the other thing I want to say is that I think this question and the conversation is flagging what some of Shawn's comments earlier identify, is that often the way that AI and the gaps that AI are filling are flagging structural issues, right? I mean, when we see people turning in waves to, Gen AI chatbots for things like mental health supports, that's flagging a structural issue and a lack of mental health accessible services to people that are not AI. So, one of the things we've heard, and we're doing a project right now with survivors of intimate partner violence, is, well, I'm in a waiting queue for 6 months to access, an expert, or I could go, turn to the AI that's available at my fingertips. Of course, that's a incredible, it feels impossible sort of challenge, to overcome when someone is, waiting many times desperately for service, and AI appears to sort of be that stopgap. So, I'd say both things. There are absolutely, practical tips and solutions and suggestions we need to offer people to be cautious when using these tools. But I think, it's sort of incumbent upon us to also address, or at least flag, that these things are themselves flagging bigger structural challenges.
Thank you, Cara. So I think we've got time for one final question. We may not get round to all the panelists, but I'm sure that we'll have an opportunity to follow this up at a later date, or to follow on. But this says, following the introduction from Tanya, could the panelists talk a bit more about how the different projects implement the ideas that are usually attached to critical approaches, in contrast to the focus on these sort of industry or labour skills that we've talked about? And again, I know, Tanya, you have developed some of those training sessions or sessions, so perhaps maybe just highlighting some of those and how they've worked.
So in terms of the delivery, I think I mentioned on the fact that we've been working with physical objects. Could be pictures. We started with pictures through the image library, but actually bringing in rocks of silicon, water sprays, mining shovels, things like that are things that we use when we're looking at the kind of the labour force of AI, the socio-technical elements is actually, and what that does is it gets people to realise that it's not some intangible, mysterious thing that they're not smart enough to look at, but it's actually made from people, from the earth, the thing that they're, part of. So it's kind of really empowering and brings it to them and makes it real. So that's one good thing. We've also done a lot of work on metaphors, and building on, in fact, there's been a whole collection of educators writing on generative AI metaphors. And this is part of the kind of removing barriers side, is because normally the language we use is so laden with metaphors that we don't realise we're even using. And whenever someone tries to explain something, they'll often introduce a new one. And metaphor and analogy are so laden with, baggage and somebody's individual perception of what that particular analogy means to them. It's imbued with all the, kind of social indicators around that. So we're working on a metaphor encyclopedia at the moment, hopefully a project similar to Better Images of AI, but like an encyclopedia method, looking at the context, the usage, how we're kind of led to believe certain things by the comparisons. Can we do better ones? Can we do ones that explain certain attributes of AI? Because ultimately they're successful because they're about the storytelling. They're about bringing it to things that you know and understand outside of it. So yeah, so lots of work on metaphor. If anyone's got any to submit, we're collecting and decoding them at the moment. And also similar to that, kind of looking at hype narratives. So it's really thinking about, things like, logical fallacies in narratives, thinking about where do height narratives come from. We did a collection of 20 essays, articles looking at the overinflation and misrepresentation of AI capabilities in performance. And this is also really empowering because it gets people to think, oh, well, I mean, we don't show them the essays, but we've worked, you know, from case studies within them, get people to think, well, you know, this is what I'm being told, but actually these are the questions that I could have asked about that. So Civic Data Co-op have also got like a slide deck they've just put out, which is about asking, giving quotes on technology throughout the ages. So, you know, desituating it from the current time, and then asking people to discuss the quotes. So these are all, you know, I could talk about it all day, sorry, but these are all kind of different strategies.
Thank you, Tanya, and I can see some really interesting resources shared in the chat as well, so appreciate that. Our time has rushed. It's gone so quickly this hour. We have sort of felt like we've touched so many important topics, but haven't. More time would always be nice. But I'm going to draw to a close now and say thank you and hand back to Anabel just to have some final remarks and also just give some information about the context of the project in which we're doing this. But thank you to all our panelists. It's been fantastic to hear your thoughts and to bring together again the UK-Canada link.
Yes, I can thank the panelists again, Shawn Mitchell from London, from Toronto Public Library, and do look at their AI policy because it is one of the first that we've identified, and I think really important moving forward. Tanya Duarte from WEandAI, Cara Brisson-Boivin from MediaSmarts, and Tim Davies from Connected by Data. I have added all of their URLs as well in a chat, so just for an opportunity for further reading. We also want to welcome anybody who would like to stay connected with the project to just email us. We have Selena, who's our research assistant, her email here, and I want to also thank her for all the support in putting this together. I also want to thank Matt Ward, who's our technical support at FIMS, so we really appreciated all your help today. And please, if you want to be part of this larger conversation ongoing over time, do connect with us. We're really looking forward to building, you know, a larger network that maybe connects, you know, different disciplines, different locations, different perspectives. We see this as a really important way of moving forward. And as we can see from the number of questions and perspectives, there's not one way really of looking at this. I think that if we want to make move forward and really understanding not only what AI literacy is, but what AI really is in our daily lives, you know, and like how it will become a part of everyday life, the norms, how it will change how we think about ourselves, about our social relations. You know, it is important to continue in a critical way this conversation. And with that, I want to also thank the entire audience. You know, we were delighted to have you here today and be part of this conversation.